Good. I think we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to get started because we have a lot to cover. So as Christopher just said, good afternoon, everyone, or yeah, I guess good afternoon, and welcome to the Bankers Helping Bankers Fund webinar on artificial intelligence. My name is Richard Leggett, and along with my colleague Neeraj Vora, I'm the co-managing partner of the BHB Fund, and I also have the pleasure of moderating today's discussion. Just as a quick background reminder, the BHB Fund is a new fintech venture capital fund that's focused on improving the competitiveness of community banks. We like to say that it's a tech venture fund for community banks by community banks, meaning that community banks are the large majority of our investors, and we're investing in technology companies that benefit the banks. We're fortunate to be part of the broader Bankers Helping Bankers ecosystem and to also have two wonderful partners that are our strategic partners and also investors in IBAT and FedFiz. I am so excited for this discussion, and boy, I couldn't think it could be more timely than right now, given that everywhere we turn, we're hearing about AI. And while AI has been around for a number of years, some argue the concept first emerged in the 1950s. But it's really just been in the last couple of months with the emergence of ChatGPT that AI has become mainstream in our social awareness. And it has it has implications to nearly all aspects of our lives, from how we learn, to how we invest, to how we work. It's also clear to me, at least, that we're at an inflection point, and perhaps we're on the cusp of maybe the single biggest technology revolution in our history. In fact, Marc Andreessen recently authored an essay where he claims that AI will save the world, essentially by raising the collective and individual intelligence of members of society. So that's pretty lofty ambitions for AI. Having said that, I think we're also in a phase, and we may be for some time, where we have more questions than answers. I, for one, as both an investor in early stage companies and also as an individual, while I'm nervous about the unknown, I'm incredibly excited about the potential that this technology will unlock, which brings us to today's discussion. We have three goals for today's session. The first goal is to provide some basic knowledge and education on AI. What is it? Where are the opportunities? What are the risks? Our second goal is to discuss the implications of AI for the community banking sector. And then our final goal number three, is to actually bring AI to life through a here and now application and use case for community banks. And we're going to aim to do all of this in one short hour, so we better get started. So in that spirit, I'm honored to be joined by our three distinguished experts. Let me start with Rama Elaru. Rama is currently a senior director at the Special Competitive Studies Project, which is a nonprofit that's funded by Eric and Wendy Schmidt, and it's established to make recommendations to strengthen America's long-term competitiveness for a future where AI and other emerging technologies reshape our national security, our economy, and our society. Previous to the SCSP, she was a director at the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, which is an independent commission established by Congress to consider the methods and means to advance the development of AI and associated technologies to address the national security and defense needs of the United States. Rama was detailed to the NSCAI from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, where she served as an administrative patent judge on the Patent and Trial and Appeal Court. And before joining the USPTO, Rama practiced IP law for 20 years. Rama, welcome, and thanks so much for joining.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Rich.
Our second expert is Christopher Williston, the president and CEO of the Independent Bankers Association of Texas, the largest state association dedicated exclusively to community banking advocacy. Prior to leading IBAT, Christopher served the association for 9 years in numerous roles, including COO, and he held the position of Director of Communications at the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors for Texas. As president and CEO of IBAT, Christopher has responsibility for the association as well as its subsidiaries, including the IBAT Educational Foundation and IBAT Services. It's also a pleasure for us that Christopher sits on the BHB Fund's investment committee. Christopher, welcome, and thanks for joining.
Thanks a bunch, Rich.
And our third expert is Slaven Bilak. Slaven's the founder and CEO of Agent IQ, which is an AI-powered digital customer engagement platform. It's also a BHB Fund portfolio company. Slaven leads the engineering team in managing the technology behind the company's platform. And prior to Agent IQ, Slaven worked at Google for more than a decade in both their Japanese and American offices. He specialized in software engineering and helped establish a machine intelligence unit in Google Cloud. Slaven, it's great to have you here as well.
Thank you, Rich. Great to be in here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Our format for today is a moderated discussion, and I encourage our audience to submit questions via the question and answer link or the little button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I'll do my best to weave your questions into the Q&A section. And if we don't get to all of your questions, don't worry, we'll work to get written answers back to you all after the session. So we'll have a moderated discussion for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions for the remaining 15 minutes. So with that, why don't we just jump right in? And Rama, I'm going to start with you. And I think what's helpful for our audience is to start at the 30,000 foot level. And I think one good place to start is maybe with some basic definitions for our audience, as we hear a lot of terminology around AI, and I think it's important to set the stage. So in the last few weeks, we've heard so much about generative AI, and as a starting point, maybe there's two important concepts to define as a basic starting point for our audience. Number one is, what is generative AI? And secondly, what are large language models, where you see written sometimes LLMs, and how does it all operate?
Thanks, Rich. AI is a foundational technology like electricity upon which other technologies are built and accelerated. It's a general purpose technology of unlimited possibilities. So there's really no universal definition of AI, but there's a pretty common understanding that it mimics and simulates human thinking and decision-making. It's computational systems, computers, as well as iPhones that we all carry that can ingest vast amounts of data and analyze it by conducting statistical analysis and recognizing patterns. In essence, the AI learns things, and based on this analysis, the AI can perform tasks that seem very similar to how humans think. Like making recommendations or decisions, and how your Netflix recommends the next movie you should see. Generative AI models, I would say, are an application of AI. Generative AI models are trained on large existing data sets like the internet, and uses data to generate new output and language that can appear to mimic human language and human characteristics. And generative AI models, some of them can generate images, video, and music, and again, as well as text. And large language models are generative AI models that generate text. Initially, they were designed to predict the next word, the next sentence, the next paragraph. But what the technologists discovered is, as these models grew really, really large, and they had more data and they had more compute, the possibilities were not even something that they predicted. They appeared to exhibit intelligence because they generate text like I mentioned earlier, and they can perform on tests like the MCAT and the LSAT. And they're also multimodal languages, which can generate images and videos from text and vice versa.
So generative AI is a type of AI, but there's other types of AI. Is there a way to kind of segment out the entire AI sector, or in various definitions of application categories?
I think it's a good useful to think of them as applications. I think the best way to understand generative AI is it's an application of AI. For example, ChatGPT is a large language model, as you mentioned. The chat part of ChatGPT is a user interface that allows someone like you and me to interact with the AI model and to ask questions and get its output. And it's not one type of software algorithm. There's different kinds of software architecture that can qualify as AI. And it can enable different types of tasks, like AI is in our iPhones, it's in our cars, it's in machines and factories.
So I guess generative AI has really just made it much more tangible for the average person, because we've been actually relying on AI, it sounds like, for a long time. It was behind the scenes. Now generative AI puts it front and center. And is generative AI, can you envision then large language models or different generative AI models and applications for different use cases? Is that the way to think about it? Because when I think about how fast this is evolving, and we think about how will this play out over the next several years, other technology kind of cycles that you've seen emergence of platforms and tools and applications. Is that the way we should think about how AI will play out, or will it be specifically just applications and specific applications?
I think it will play out like that with platforms. So, for example, I heard that OpenAI, which is a company behind ChatGPT, is actually thinking about having an app store. much like Apple has an app store. So I think that is a good way to think about it. I think it's hard to predict precisely how these AI systems will evolve, but based on sort of what's been happening in the last few months, the last few years, I think in the next 1 to 5 years, we could see a few number of really frontier large language models. The ones we've seen grow even larger, like maybe 10 times larger. We'll also see a proliferation of finely tuned large language models that are used for specific purposes, like you mentioned, as well as open source models that are freely accessible to anybody.
Where from where you sit, do you see the greatest opportunities? I want to talk about a little bit about opportunities and then risks. But first, let's start with opportunities in terms of use cases or impacts to, which sectors will be impacted the most in your view?
Well, I think this is really up to human ingenuity. I think, let's take doctors, for example, right? I think that's a great place where AI can be incredibly useful for our society. Doctors have so many demands on their time while, working to help us, treat us, save our lives. And medicine has become incredibly complicated. So no doctor, as brilliant as they are, can know everything. AI will increasingly help doctors better diagnose and treatment plans. So think of one doctor, you go to your doctor because he's got great experience based on all of his past patients. So think of a doctor that can digest all the information of every doctor in the world, right? And have all those experiences to draw on. That's what an AI can help with. And I think another area is teaching, education. There's a teacher shortage in America. Different students learn in different ways, have different strengths, different weaknesses. And I think AI can help with personalized education because it can learn patterns of how a student learns or doesn't learn and help try to rectify that as well. I think healthcare is another area where AI can be very useful. AI has already been used to identify drug candidates. See which drug candidates will work best, which ones won't work, which will work for certain people better than others. Also AI is enabling research into the creation of fusion energy. So hopefully AI will help us with some of the climate problems that we're having. I think AI will impact the economy. AI can provide significant economic benefits. It enables automation, provides a major boost to productivity, which in turn boosts economic output. And even when automation might displace some jobs, it also creates new ones. By 2030, AI is predicted to contribute between 13 trillion and 15 trillion to the global economy. So that's definitely something that is useful to society.
An additive or 13 trillion or net?
I think it's net.
Okay, all right, good. And we're going to talk in a moment about the implications to banking. But before I do that, I just kind of want to, at the 30,000 foot level, just talk about some risks. So with all of this, which sounds incredibly exciting, you also hear some risks ranging from, on one end of the spectrum, Terminator-like machines essentially taking over the world and destroying humans, to more specific risks, which I think are probably a little more realistic, tied to data privacy, security, and also the spreading of misinformation. So from your perspective, where you sit, what are the top 3 areas of risks that you're tracking as you look into the future, and how do you see those risks being mitigated?
As impressive as generative AI responses may be, today's state of the large language models still produce responses that are subject to bias, are irrelevant, or can actually present incorrect information as seemingly as if it were factual, because these large language models are really eager to provide you with an answer. And so if they don't have a factually correct one, they might have to put some facts together that aren't true to provide you that output. Some also other potential risks on the horizon are AI-enabled autonomous disinformation. And that's a pressing concern given elections next year in 2024. Over 1 billion people in the world will be voting in 2024. And disinformation can create, AI-enabled tools can create audio, video, images that seem really lifelike, but they aren't. And so that can really manipulate our election process, our democratic institutions, and polarize our communities. I think Another one that another risk is that these AI tools can end up in the hands of bad actors who wanted to do us harm, like create biological agents. So I think we need to find the right balance between innovation and regulation. So I think one of the near-term solutions is for companies to come together and agree on some standards and norms, for example, for the elections next year, and mitigating the harms from deep fakes. But we also need regulation. The Hill is very interested in trying to figure out the best way to govern these and shape these technologies while also promoting innovation, because we do want to be the leaders, global leaders with our partners and allies in shaping these technologies according to democratic values.
It's tricky because we're not alone in the world, right? So we can do all the right things, but that doesn't prevent all of those risks you just talked about coming from the outside. So we've got to watch that. One last question for you, and then I'm going to turn to kind of the sector, the banking sector. But just from your perspective, because many of us on this webinar are parents, we're managers, we're grandparents, perhaps. At the end of the day, we're leaders and mentors of junior people. And as we think about providing guidance to our employees, our kids, our grandkids, our mentees, how should we think about the future of the workplace in light of the emergence of AI in terms of the required skills and capabilities and disciplines that will be needed in the future? In other words, how do we make sure that we're embracing this in a constructive way and not having it make ourselves and our skills irrelevant, I guess?
It's totally understandable for there to be concerns around the future of the workforce. I think these fears also have to be balanced by the facts of what these models are actually capable of, and educating workers on these profound tech advancements. And so letting our workers be able to harness the benefits so that they can do their jobs better and be more effective, and also develop new skills so they can adapt around these new technologies when their productivity is boosted. I think that the introduction of large language models is a game changer. It'll transform every industry and advance business forward at a rate faster than we've ever seen before. And companies that harness the power of large language models will have a significant competitive advantage. And as generative AI system capabilities improve, the competitive advantage will go to the businesses and governments that most effectively incorporate these systems into their processes. So we should view AI as an opportunity for humans to be faster, to have more informed workers, and not necessarily replace them. And given that it can increase our productivity and spark even creativity, and this will be a beneficial asset, I think, to have in the workplace.
It's interesting. You mentioned kind of the concept of having an assistant, and also the teaching method and how you can tailor teaching. And I think about that in terms of how we develop productivity, and also how we can more accelerate the development of skills in the workplace with our employees. It sounds like it could be quite powerful. All right. Why don't, yeah. Oh, did you want to make one last comment, Rama? Okay. Thank you. I want to shift gears now and focus the next part of our discussion. We'll come back to you, Rama, with questions, but I want to focus the next part of the discussion on our sector, and specifically financial services and community banking in particular. So at the BHB Fund, we firmly believe that community financial institutions have a real imperative, a here and now strategic mandate to invest in technology that will improve their competitiveness, empower their growth, and drive operational efficiency. And Christopher, I'm going to turn to you because you've been a vocal advocate of the importance for community banks to adopt technology. Essentially, I think you've even characterized it as a matter of survival. So now with this emergence of AI, how does that impact your thinking and your guidance on the subject?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I'll start with the premise, right? That technology adoption is going to be important as a matter of survival. I think I'm not one of those guys that runs around going innovate or die. But I think, just understanding and being able to harness technology is going to be important for community banks, just based on very basic business principles, right? That the idea that successful businesses now and in the future are going to have to control expenses, and they're going to have to generate income. So just those basic ideas, right? For community banks, living up to those two ideas could be hard, or they may be more challenging in the future. Our expense management and community banking has largely been challenged because of regulatory burden. And because by and large, community banks have not seen the same benefits of technology-enabled efficiency that some other industries have so far, right? There's just too much of a hodgepodge of technology systems within banks that make it difficult for them to realize some of these promises of technology fully. The other side of that coin, right, is generation of income. And traditional income streams of community banks are really, really well defined and they're solid, but there's definitely more competition for those streams of income. So it becomes a question of how do we make the most out of every customer relationship and ensure that it's as profitable as it can be. This is, community banks have not been amazing marketers or people that leverage data traditionally very well. I see AI really as important in bolstering this as a whole because it can come in and help perform those repetitive tasks that provide or help provide insights that could lead to the expansion of a customer relationship. It just, to me, it's sort of the next step in what we've been talking about in the promise of technology, but just haven't seen fully realized in community banking as a whole.
So if you put your community bank executive hat on, where do you see the greatest opportunity specifically from or applications of AI for community banks, both right now today, and we'll see one in a little bit, and then as we look out into the future?
Yeah, this is one of those areas where, I feel like I could end up like Paul Krugman saying like, the internet's not going to have that big of an impact on business, or, I don't want to do that. I think any prognostication that I could come up with is probably going to pale in comparison to that human ingenuity that Rama talked about, that we'll see applications come through. But there's a couple of areas I want to talk through first. And the first is credit underwriting, because I think that's one area that people look at like, oh, how do we do credit underwriting in a more automated, better, whatever way, right? The problem I have with that discussion is what's wrong with credit underwriting, especially in community banks, right? Community banks credit underwriting is really, really solid. Their historical credit losses are de minimis. I mean, it's hard to improve on near zero. So then the next question becomes, okay, well, could it enable it to be done faster, right? Could AI do credit underwriting without kind of the people factor or maybe the character factor? The things I worry about in that regard is that this could end up costing us kind of that relationship-based lending that is truly a characteristic of, and I think a competitive advantage of community banking. So I struggle with that one. Everybody, when you have discussion about AI and banking, people jump to credit underwriting, and I'm going to kind of say, I don't see it there. Let me camp out on some areas as I really dream about the future that I think it could make a difference. While I don't think initial credit underwriting is probably the area of most potential, I do think more active credit risk monitoring, right? Where you're looking at or could leverage large swaths of data to identify risks earlier, right? If you were able to look at, let's just say, occupancy rates across commercial real estate over a large, metro area, and understand how that might affect both pricing and future occupancy for your commercial properties. That right there is a leveraging of technology. I think AI could be a great assistance. Of course, there's other things like fraud detection and prevention. That's going to be extremely important as we continue to see just the speed of money movement take shape with real-time payments and the implementation of FedNow. We're really, really early in that, but I think it's going to change. Even if you were to look at and think about how you're detecting fraud, yes, but even liquidity risk monitoring as it relates to real-time payments. Those things could be really, really valuable, and I think AI could help there. The last thing I'll speak to is really those prescriptive insights and actions in marketing. This is going to become even more important for bankers as we get deeper into the open banking movement and the implementation of Section 1033 of the Dodd-Frank Act, which makes all of our financial data more portable and allows any given institution to have greater insight into the totality of a customer's financial life. All of these things could lead to better predictive insights that could be enabled by AI.
Just some good areas, and I suspect as we know at the fund, good investable themes as well.
I hope so.
Yeah, if I turn the other side of the ledger, which is the challenges, there are a number of challenges that community banks already face when it comes to just adopting technology. But then I think some of those challenges become even greater when you think about AI. So can you talk a little bit about where you see challenges?
Yeah, and this is a much shorter answer, Rich. I already alluded to it. I think it's all about the biggest challenges are in data accessibility and data hygiene, right? Just how clean is the data and how actionable is it? How accessible is the data? You know, I mentioned community banks often have data spread out over disparate systems. They have, you know, multiple points of data entry. There's not unity and the record keeping. That's a huge challenge that exists in community banking today. I think it's probably the #1 hurdle that we'll have to get over in terms of being able to leverage AI to do anything with the data that we have already.
So it's that siloed nature and some of the legacy systems that we're all dependent on, and how quickly can they adopt and evolve and emerge, I guess. Yeah, the other question I wanted to ask you, Christopher, just given your other hat as the head of the association, is and Rama hinted at this a little bit at the 30,000 foot level, but any discussion about emerging technologies and specifically banking has to include a discussion about the regulatory environment. And I guess there's a lot of things going on in the regulatory environment, but how do you see that shifting or playing out when it comes to the specific adoption of AI?
Yeah, the regulators have to be front and center. In fact, there's a question in the queue that plays into this perfectly. So I'm glad somebody asked about an issue spotlight the CFPB did on this. You know, the regulators have pledged to support industry efforts for innovation. There's no doubt there's these little innovation offices within each of the regulatory agencies, and I know they want to see the harnessing of technology to help banks be competitive and continue to do business well. But as they do so, they're going to be analyzing a couple of things along the way, right? And that first is about functionality, right? What function is the AI fulfilling, and does it hold potential for customer harm or disparate treatment, right? The second is who's building these models. We have a question in the queue, like who owns these models, right? And I know we want to talk about that later, but who's building these models and upon what assumptions are those models predicated, right? Is there UDAP potential there? If you're looking, for instance, I'll just give a very real practical application today. You know, there's already talk about inherent bias in the appraisal process. So if you were building an AI model that was trying to do appraisals more efficiently or better, but the historical data on appraisals was based on an area where the CFPB believes that there's potential for appraisal bias, then is there bias built into the modeling? And I think those are the factors ultimately that they're going to look at is this fair? Is it potentially deceptive? How could this affect the consumers in a way that would be harmful or build some bias into processes? So let me speak real quickly just to this one AI issue that's been identified by the CFPB, and this was really narrowly driven and focused on AI chatbots and their potential to do a couple of things. First, they were concerned. The CFPB said, "Look, we're worried that a customer is going to share personal information with a chatbot, and that chatbot is going to ingest that data without proper privacy protections or other things that you need to be concerned about." Okay, we all can understand and appreciate that. They were also concerned about customers interacting with a chatbot in such a way that maybe they're asking to report on a dispute, a transaction dispute, but the chatbot isn't giving them the right prompts. It isn't telling them how to do that in such a way that complies with federal law. Okay, we understand that, right? You don't want, whereas if Slavin were on the call saying, "I understand your concern, we have a protocol to address that, and here's how you do it," but the chatbot isn't giving the same response that a human would give in that instance, then obviously that would be a cause for concern. The last would be just, you know, a customer trying to reach out to their financial institution, getting stuck in a loop with a chatbot and not getting past a certain point. Overall concern is trust, right? Rama talked about how important it is that we have accurate information, reliable information, things that are not built on misinformation. Financial institutions stand to lose the most if they lose customer trust. And I think there's concern in the regulatory agencies that in some way, shape, or fashion, that AI-driven solutions could undermine consumer trust. And that obviously would be disastrous for the industry. It's a long answer, but I hope gets to some of the themes I think we'll identify now and in the future, Rich, when it comes to regulatory response.
So just on this topic, I'm going to turn to you in a minute, but is there anything you wanted to jump in and add here, given your business?
Yeah, I think Christopher and Rama brought some great points here, and I do think from the bank perspective, it is important to think about what values they want to present to their customers and what makes them different. So I think that relationship aspect, having that community understanding and having the preservation of trust have to be paramount, right? And ultimately that is what we base our business model on. And I think it's a key to think about applying AI in the context which makes sense for your institution, not necessarily in context that gets publicized and a lot of eyeballs in general context.
Okay. Anything else, Christopher, before I move on?
Yeah,
I know we have some questions. I'll come back on those, but any
yeah, no, then let's table for now. We'll come back on the questions. That's great, Rich. Thanks.
Okay. And just as a reminder, if you do have a question, take a moment to submit it in the question and answer the Q&A little button, and we'll get to them as we get to the last part of our segment here. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So I want to shift gears quickly now again for the third segment of our discussion, which is really let's bring AI to life today using what we like to refer to as a here and now use case. And for that, we're going to turn to Slaven. And in full disclosure, the BHB Fund is an investor in Agent IQ. And I mentioned this not only to disclose it, but I also want to highlight that a core part of our investment thesis in the company was how they were harnessing the power of AI to deliver what is a secure and purpose-built solution for community financial institutions that ultimately help drive costs down and customer satisfaction up. And that was kind of core to our thesis. So Slaven, maybe we could just begin with a quick overview for our audience who may not be as familiar with Agent IQ. Like, who is Agent IQ? What does it do? And then we'll drive in a little bit to how it uses AI, and then a demo even. So.
Sure, thank you. So Agent IQ is a platform or company that develops a platform which enables banks, community banks first and foremost, to provide relationship banking in digital space. Christopher has talked about the importance of relationships. These used to be developed in branch, in person, but as interactions are moving in digital space, there needs to be a solution to move the relationships in digital space too. And ultimately, that is what Agent IQ provides. We work with community banks, and our platform has several advantages. One of them is the ability to provide a personal relationship-centric service. The other one is AI built in the platform to make it easier for bankers to service the customers and to increase the efficiency and allow them to provide kind of optimal service levels for all the customer segments.
So could you want to show a demo in a second just to bring this to life, but specifically, how does Agent IQ deploy AI today? Like what about it? What is it doing with AI?
Sure. And to answer this, again, I'll go back to what Rama was saying and ChatGPTs, which obviously what is getting a lot of attention now. So AI is a very general concept which covers lots of different models, which can power lots of different applications. ChatGPT is one type of model with one type of application. G in GPT stands for general. So it's fairly general, so not catered for bank financial institutions by definition. That's one side. So while it's very useful, very good at what it does using large language models, which enables it to produce very easy to understand and fluent language, definitely better than what I as a non-native speaker can produce, as in writing. But it does have limitations because it's not trained for other types of application. I think Christopher talked about fraud prevention and risk assessment. types of applications. This is something that ChatGPT would not be useful for because it's not developed for, it's not modeled for, and does not have information to act on it. There are other types of models which do provide that capability, and you know, by all means, banks should consider deploying them. But coming to our applications, which is kind of customer service relationship building, what banks typically face are, again, what Christopher mentioned, very limited API availability or disparity of data, so not everything is accessible. Again, coming back to what ChatGPT can do, understanding a customer is not sufficient. You actually have to be able to help them, perform them a transaction, or give them very context-sensitive answer, and that's not something that ChatGPT would be able to do. That's important to consider. Another one was very high risk sensitivity, obviously due to regulatory and compliance requirements. No AI system is perfect, and it will make some mistakes. In banking context, risk of a mistake is much, much higher than reward of a correct answer. So you can help, you know, tens of customers, but if you do something that violates regulatory and compliance for one customer, the cost of that is much higher and much more complex to deal with. So the risk trade-off is different from general communication. And then ultimately, most banks don't have the ability to train models, maintain models, improve models over time. So really the question is how to make it possible for them to enter into AI, you know, reap the benefit without having to invest a lot of resources. And these are kind of all of the problems that Agent IQ solves. We focus on what we call augmented intelligence, which basically aims not to remove the human from the conversation, but allows human to be part of it, so preserve that relationship touch and use AI for efficiency. And we provide three basic functionality: self-service functionality, which can help kind of answer easy questions, help navigate the website and such, helping bankers be faster, smarter, better, and helping the customers, and helping businesses to understand what customers are talking about, see the trends, and act on it as needed.
Do you think we could see a quick demo?
Sure.
I don't know if there's such a thing as a quick demo, given the magnitude of the scope of what you just described, but maybe something quick just to bring
Yes.
all this.
So yeah, when you said, you know, can you do a demo for 200 people, I was like, great. And when you said like has to be 5 minutes, I was like, well, then I wasn't really planning for that, but I will be happy to do a demo. This will be a quick demo. I will focus on the AI because that is the topic today. As I mentioned, core tenet of our approach is that human relationship and touch is important, and that is the key value that we provide that differentiates us. I'm not going to cover it here just because of the topic, but I'd be happy to obviously do a demo for anybody who's interested in seeing that. And here I'm going to focus on AI capability, and I'll show again self-service, AI being augmenting the bankers, helping them be faster, better, smarter, and then how it helps the business owners. And you guys can see my screen just to make sure. Okay, so I'm going to hide my video. So there's two parts of the screen. On the left side, we see what we call the banker dashboard. I am logged in as a system administrator, so I have access to metrics and stuff, which I'll cover later. And my alter ego here is Steve Kerr. On the right side, I have a public-facing customer website. We do have a mobile application also, which provides authenticated capabilities, authenticated chat, and you can also be behind the login. But for the purposes of a demo, I'll be focusing on a public website. And first, I will show you kind of how a self-service works. Clicking on the help menu, we can provide contextual information for the customers. Obviously, customers looking for help. Maybe we can offer help in different languages, English, Spanish in this case. I want to point out that all of these menus and interactions are highly configurable, so you don't have to take something that we thought was appropriate, but you can create something that is appropriate in your context. English speaker, I guess, is what most people want to see, so I'll help with that. And it's going to help answer easy questions like, what is my routing number? That's great. Is there anything else? If the customer chooses to type, they can do that too, right? And we'll try to understand what they're talking about. And again, we'll then give them some relevant options. In this case, customer is asking, how can I deposit a check? And we give an option of different forms of deposit. Let's say they want to do the mobile phone, and we can give them the instructions. Also share a QR code, which will give them help to download the app if they don't have it. And this is taking some time because we're on the low bandwidth right now, but it will show up in a second here. So if they don't have a mobile app, they can download it, and ultimately they can take it from there. And at any point in time, we do allow them to ask to talk to a person, right? And when that happens, our system will not try to contain them, say, hey, can you try a different way, whatever. We do believe that getting to a human is very important. In this case, I will be signing to Steve, who is available on the platform, has the capacity to handle. And now customer sees they're talking to a person. It's not a chatbot anymore, virtual assistant. It is a system. On Steve's side, he got a notification, and he will see he has a new customer that he can start interacting with. He can also see the interactions that the customer has had with the virtual assistant model. So he will not need to ask any question that already been asked, and can take it away. And obviously they can continue their interaction. Our platform does provide the ability to do video calling and co-browsing. I will not show that, so I will just show now how AI can help the banker. So let's say a customer is looking to buy a house and they're looking for a mortgage. And now there's a couple of things that happen. So you can see this is the message from the customer. We added some tags. We added a mortgage tag to it because that's relevant. And we also offer some suggestions for relevant documents that are stored in the knowledge base of the bank that can show information to the customer about the process, and Steve can share this. Another thing where I want to show you is that imagine, Steve goes through the process, talk to the customer, and they have to come to some point where they need to do some data collection, verification, maybe something that's required by compliance and regulatory requirements. And let's admit, this is not something that most bankers enjoy doing. And it's a task that can easily be automated in our platform. So I can show you, so Steve now can run a workflow and choose relevant workflow. If they're not sure what it does, they can kind of see an example of the interaction. So make sure this is exactly kind of the workflow that I would like to run. They can close that and run it. And now control is passed back to the virtual assistant that asks the customer questions. Again, this is all very configurable and can be adjusted to what you're doing. These questions I got off the mortgage application website from one of our partner banks. So they are kind of regulatory requirements. So I'm just going to answer them. I'm not a consignor of a different loan. There's no outstanding judgments about me. I'm not delinquent from the debt. I'm not a party of a lawsuit. And there's nothing else. There's nothing else to share. And you can see that the customer was able to get prompted with the right answers. They know they're talking to a virtual assistant, again, making sure that the trust element is there. They know when they're talking to a person, when they're talking to AI. They're able to AI collects information and then passes the control back to Steve. And Steve can close the conversation any way they want. And this makes it for very efficient, seamless interaction. The last thing that I wanted to show is the metrics and kind of how insights get extracted and generated by AI can help business owners understand. And we have 3 different levels of data extraction for all those interactive menus that you have seen. We provide insights and how customers are interacting with them, what fraction of responses are chosen for each of the menu options. And that can be used to kind of fine tune them, adjust them as needed. We also use semi-structured data based on some categories that are predefined by the bank, and we can monitor how they change over time. Again, showing the trends, what people talk about, and this can be very actionable. We actually have examples of our banks extracting trends they were not aware of and using that to do proactive outreach to our platform, which is one other capability that's possible. And then, so this is semi-structured, and then we finally have the unstructured kind of data extraction, where even if it's something they've not thought about, our AI will try to extract topics and examples of such topics from the conversations that customers have to help you identify them, and then they can be moved to semi-structured data and whatnot. So these three levels of insights really help you understand, what customers are talking about, what their preferences are, and potentially what areas of improvement are. And
So
so then
just
others,
one thing.
yeah.
Yeah, one thing that one of our audience members kind of dropped in the chat while you were doing the demo is just the
Yep.
sense that that a lot of this feels like it's stuff you get from the big banks. It's not, doesn't feel as personal. Like how do you answer that? Like, how does this feel like a much more personalized experience using, while using AI, but still making sure the customer feels like, they have that relationship with their community bank.
Sure.
They're not just dealing with.
And the sentiment of it is correct. I mean, what I showed is really self-service, and it's not accentuating or pointing out what the personal relationship. We do provide capability to maintain the relationship. So, for example, when the customer comes back, let's say I'm reloading the page. Let me just close this. I go to some other. Let me see if I have. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, that's not something. Okay. So I come back to the page later, and I want to continue the conversation. You actually can continue the conversation. You're not forgotten. You still can talk to Steve if Steve is available. If not, other options will be offered. But ultimately, the most personal benefit you get from the authenticated chat, and that's where you can have a personal banker, concierge, primary point of contact that you can keep talking to all the time or as long as necessary. And that's where the relationship gets formed. Here, it's anonymous user, so relationship is by definition short-lived, and aspect of personalization is limited. And the true benefit is in that authenticated relationship-based chat that we do provide, which I did not demo.
Similar to what you'd have if you were actually in the branch. It's kind of the virtual branch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to keep an eye on the clock, and I know there are good questions, so I want to jump into a couple of the questions. Slaven, thank you for that demo. I know that we could have spent an hour on just the demo, so I do appreciate you giving us just a little taste. And the whole point of this was just to show that AI is not this thing that's coming down the road, that you've been embracing it for years. It's actually in a here and now pretty powerful use case. But what
I wanted to point out just a couple of things. So we are able, again, our model is not to force banks to provide us with a lot of data and spend a lot of time training the models. We do understand that most banks, especially community banks, have processes which are already encoded and decided and used by the humans, and we help them import it into our system, and then AI just helps them navigate that, right? So that makes it possible to go live very quickly. And we had cases like Extraco Bank, I believe one of the IBAT banks and one of the, maybe BHP investor banks has gone live within five weeks, I believe. And they got like a 29% reduction in call volume, and they're getting, close to 70% self-service chats handled. So their employees really can dedicate their time to the most important, open-ended, high-value questions, and not necessarily entry-level, easy-to-answer questions.
It's a really good point. Okay, let me go. We're going to go back to 30,000 feet and answer a question from one of our listeners about who owns and creates the large language models, and where do they get the data from? So Rama, can I turn that one over to you? And I suspect there's maybe 2 tiers of answers here, would be my guess, but I'm curious how you're going to answer it.
That's a really, really great question, and one that I think a lot of people are struggling with. So, for example, with respect to the large language models like ChatGPT and Bard from Google and Cloud from Anthropic, I think we know who owns those models. But we're also seeing the diffusion of a lot of open source models, right? So when you use those models, who's responsible for any harms? Who's responsible for anything that for any intellectual property that comes out of them? So if you're using an open source model in the invention creation process, and you find a great discovery, or something that can be patentable, who owns that patent? Or even with respect to these frontier large language models, when they are used in the invention creation process, I think there's some uncertainty of who owns the output. And also, when I give you data and you train it on your model, do I have any stake in that model because it was my data? And I think, as my co-panelists pointed out, data is really critical for these AI models. That's really what it comes down to, is how good your data is. And so if you take two different off-the-shelf open source models, you can have two very different results, all because of the data. So those are really great questions that I think that we're struggling with. And that's one of the things that we are actually looking at here as a special competitive studies project, is answering some of those intellectual property issues.
And to add, from my perspective, from Google being on the other side, where I was training large models with other people's data, typically the data is owned by the people that provide it, but the people that create the model, they own the model, and that's a digested representation, distilled representation of the data. So it doesn't have, say, PII or other bits of information that could be sensitive, and that's what makes them generally usable and maybe less risky in a lot of applications.
I think I know my answer, which is on my earlier question. I think I'm going to ask my kids to become IP lawyers. I think there's going to be a lot of money to be made in that. There's a question.
Content in all of this, which is that the lawyers are going to make out okay every time.
Yes,
that's the one thing we know.
Lawyers and regulators, I suspect.
That's right.
And Christopher, speaking of regulators, there's a good question about, will regulators be applying AI to 1071 data in order to determine a bank's unconscious bias? And if so, what are the practical implications, consequences, and action items for community banks?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question. It's kind of been the monster hiding under the bed for us over the last 12 years as we waited for the implementation of Section 1071 and all the small business loan application data. We don't know. I mean, that's a simple answer. We don't know, but we can look at how the regulators dealt with fair lending referrals, the way that they tried to jump on disparate impact law that came out of the fair housing and apply it to lending in a way that wasn't actually allowable by law under according to the Supreme Court, and go, yeah, we suspect that they will, right? I think the probably best implications, consequences we have to be thinking about as community banking is, how are we analyzing the data? As what is the data telling us, right? Because I think the last thing you want to be able, or you want to be in a position to happen, is for the CFPB or some other regulator to come in and say, hey, we looked at all your data, and did you know that you had this bias in your data? So how can we build in as much data analytics on the back end so that we're looking at that data and its potential implications? I think, it's just getting out ahead of that. But I think we'd all be naive if we thought that regulators like the CFPB wouldn't try to use this large new data set and tools to analyze that data set to look for instances of bias, and particularly UDAP and other violations.
I think that's right.
And just to add to that, I do think, one thing that's important to keep in perspective, there are different types of models which might be more suitable for certain applications. And again, generative models and large language models, they're very powerful, but they don't have that transparency that you need. There are simpler models which can still give you a lot of benefit, but they will give you transparency and will give you the ability to audit the trail and basically, double check that there's no bias, and or apply some regulatory filter on top to make sure that bias is handled. And, for community banks, I think one good starting point is not necessarily try to go for the coolest model, but go for the models that work for your requirements, for your context. And again, that's what Agent IQ has built our business model upon, and working with other vendors that do the similar thing and build models which are suitable is probably a better approach than trying to go for the home run with something very sexy like ChatGPT.
I think very specific models to solve specific for specific applications and solving specific problems is kind of one end of the spectrum, and then you've got this kind of general ChatGPT open source stuff that it's almost like what search is versus very specific applications in certain contexts. Rama, there's a follow-up about the ownership of the model from one of our audience members, and they say that it's their understanding there are different AI engines, kind of like search engines, that can be licensed to use within our own environments. Is that correct? And if that's the case, who would own the data similar to the way we own the data that sits in our core banking system? So even though the core banking system is provided by a third party, the bank itself owns that data. So is that correct in your view?
So I think that there's some ways to contract around these issues, right? So who owns the model, like Slavin, and who owns the data, like Slavin said. But I think there's still some uncertainty, and I think there could also be some sector specific issues with respect to who owns what. So I think those are unanswered questions right now. And sorry, that's not more of a helpful answer, but yep.
There's a question, and I think Slavin, I'll throw it to you, but others might have a view, which is how, and this is kind of a broad question, but how does the average community bank deploy AI? And again, the average community bank, might not be a huge bank with a lot of resources. It's going to be a bank that's serving in several branches, maybe 500 million of assets or even smaller. How can that bank deploy AI with constrained resources?
It's a great question, and I think it's really important to start with the problem that you're trying to solve. So identifying the right problem. So not all problems are equal. Some will have higher implication, higher ROI. So identifying a problem that you want to solve is very important. And types of problems which are suitable for AI applications are kind of repetitive, mundane types of tasks, or tasks where you have to filter through large amounts of data very quickly, right? And there are ways to estimate an impact of employing an AI system in such context for solve these problems, and estimating an ROI, which will justify the investment, is a very important first step. And then there are three, approaches to actually get AI deployed in the environment. You can use off-the-shelf systems, so basically like ChatGPT. They have an API, they're easy to use, not very context sensitive, not necessarily appropriate for deployment in a bank. The other one is on the other end of the spectrum, build it yourself, where you take some of the open source data and you follow a tutorial. It looks very simple, but it takes a long time to build the model, verify that it does what you want and doesn't do what you don't want it to do. And then the third one is partnering with a vendor like Agent IQ that has the experience, understanding of the community bank context of specific problems, ability to solve them and improve them and work with them. And I would encourage most banks to start with that vendor-centric approach, because that way you're getting a lot of know-how and building experience, which is still specific enough that can be applied to your problem in your context.
Yeah, and I think this actually speaks to the question that just popped up. We're really, really early in this process, right? AI in large mass has just really been unleashed upon the world in a way that most people understand the way that they're interacting with it. That said, I think that community banks are not going to be able. We already have technology limitations. We're going to have to rely on third parties to help us bridge this gap and realize some of the promises of AI. And I think this is a perfect place to plug. Those are the types of companies that we at the BHB Fund are going to be looking to invest in the months and years ahead, to deploy capital and make sure that those really legitimate and practical business use cases that are coming through AI can be invested in. And that's a conversation I know Rich and Niraj and everybody at the fund would love to have, for any banker that wants to be part of that by investing in the fund and making sure we're able to deploy that capital to support those business use cases.
I think from our perspective, any company we meet that are solving kind of different problems or creating opportunities for banks have to be thinking about how they incorporate AI into their solution. Agent IQ happens to be way ahead of the curve, but I think as Slaven said, if you start with the problem you're trying to solve, we're looking for companies that are going to solve those problems, and we always are asking them now about how are you leveraging AI in that process. So all right, I'm watching the clock. I think we can go on for a long time, but we are up against the time, and I think we should stick to our timetable. This has been incredible discussion, and I feel like on the one hand we barely scratched the surface on this critically important topic, and on the other hand, I think we've talked about a lot, and I hope everybody has found this discussion informative and insightful. And I can certainly promise you that it's not a one and done conversation, that we'll continue to revisit this topic. We'll be able to dive deeper down and get real specific as well in future BHB Fund webinars. I want to really thank our panelists, Rama, Christopher, and Slaven, for their time, for their insights and sharing their knowledge with us. It's really been incredible to have you all together on this. Well, any other remaining questions we'll gather answers to and send them back around via email along with the recording, so that you can pass that along to your colleagues in your banks. And I think most importantly, please feel free to reach out at any time if we at the BHB Fund or anywhere within the Bankers Helping Bankers ecosystem can be helpful to you in any way, or if you'd simply like to learn more about investing in the fund. I can't end this without a plug for the fund, so I'll do that. But otherwise, this concludes today's webinar, and on behalf of my colleagues and everyone on this call, we wish you all a very happy 4th of July holiday weekend. Thanks again for joining, and be safe.
Thank you, Rich, Chris, and
Thank
Slaven.
you.
Yeah. God bless everybody.
Thank you all.